So it's possible to reverse it, which is great news, because I think what's happening is the brain is sort of protecting itself from damage by turning off. I think that's what's going on with autism. It's not allowing the brain to work properly because it knows that the system, the organism at some organismic level, is aware that with these toxic exposures, if you let the brain do its job, you're going to kill it. You're going to destroy the neurons. They have to be very quiet because otherwise they'll die. I think it's a bit of almost a hibernation.
Wow.
Which is good news because it's protecting the brain. And I don't know how long you could have autism, I think there was actually, I've heard of an adult, I haven't met them, an adult who reversed their autism as an adult. So it's pretty exciting, I think. To give people that hope that the autism could be reversed is very exciting to me. And so people are figuring out, and especially the mothers are figuring out what to do to help their kids.
Welcome to Your Health Reset, where we address the real root causes behind health issues today to get you rapid results on your health journey so you can be who you came here to be, mind, body, and spirit. I'm your host, Sinclair Kennally, survivor of complex chronic illness, expert on resolving root causes, and co-founder of Detox Rejuvenation and Meditation RX. Let's get started. Dr. Stephanie Seneff has joined me today. I'm your host, Sinclair Kennally, and we are absolutely thrilled to be sitting down and having this conversation. Stephanie, you have been on my list of heroes for many years, and you were a guiding inspiration for me as I was learning how to heal myself from my own chronic illness. And I vividly remember the first time that I listened to one of your interviews because you were speaking so fast and my brain fog was so bad, I had to hit pause like every 20 seconds. And, okay, this woman is brilliant. I have got to absorb this information. So welcome to our community. And thank you so much for sharing your precious time with us.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here. Always happy to spread the word. Very important, I feel.
And one of the things you are most known for is being essentially the world's leading researcher on glyphosate. And I've lost count of how many papers. Last time I checked, it was over 80 papers published on the topic itself.
Not really. I've published probably over 100 papers in my lifetime, but most of them are in computer science. So I have about a few dozen papers on toxic chemical.
Oh, just a few dozen. Okay.
Yeah, since about 2007, I've been working in this space and starting with the autism epidemic, which I'm very nervous about. Every year we have more and we're just diagnosing it more, not a problem. Don't even address it. It breaks my heart.
I know, me too. And I'm so glad that we're tackling some of the root causes for that head on together. And I can't wait to unpack that with you today. I also want to make sure that everybody knows that you are the author of a phenomenal book. And I saw that you have it.
I have it. Paperback is coming out. It might even be out already, but it's coming out very soon. The paperback version. This is the hard copy. Toxic Legacy, how the herbicide glyphosate is destroying our health and the environment.
Yeah.
And I worked really hard on that book. Took me 2 years, but it was worth it. I feel it was worth it. It's being well received.
And it's so meaty. It took me forever to read through it. I'm not a strong reader. I reclaimed a lot of my mental faculties after being ill, but it was so worth it because every page is literally full of insights. If you haven't read this book yet, please go out and get it today because it's so important for us to disseminate this information. Let's talk about your journey with glyphosate. First of all, for those who are unfamiliar, what is glyphosate and what is the role that it's playing in our health today?
Glyphosate is the active ingredient in the herbicide Roundup, and many people have not heard of glyphosate, but they know Roundup. Now, Roundup's so common. At the garden store, go down, buy some Roundup, kill the weeds in your walkway. A very safe chemical, wonderful, kills all weeds, kills all plants actually, except that those that have been engineered to resist it. But it's completely harmless to humans, so it's a wonderful chemical. We use it all over the food supply. It's all over. We use it all over the crops that are feed into our food. And the government doesn't bother to test it. They know it's all over the food supply, but they don't bother to test it because it's harmless. That's the situation we're in. And the problem is that it's not harmless. It's extremely toxic. So when you look at that situation, mothers can go use glyphosate on their lawn while their kids are playing and not think anything of it. Many parents just don't think they don't use any kind of protection. And of course, eating it in the food. If you live next door to a farm where it's being sprayed, you're going to breathe it in and your lungs are going to get sick. And you basically, in America, it's very hard to avoid it. The good news is that certified organic often tests negative, doesn't always, because you can be certified organic next door to a farm where they're spraying it and you can't put a fence around your farm. So it's going to even be in organic foods grown here often, but much, much lower levels. So generally look for that certified organic label when you shop for all the foods that you buy, not just non-GMO, because some of the highest levels are in the non-GMO crops like wheat and oats and barley and garbanzo beans, chickpeas, hummus. They all have extremely high levels if they're not organic.
Yeah.
Because it's sprayed right before harvest to kill the crop.
It isn't that telling in and of itself. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really important overview. And I would love to help people understand what is the range of health issues that glyphosate can be a contributing factor in.
It's a huge list. I feel it's a huge list. And of course, starting with autism, I was on a journey to figure out autism. I've been fascinated with autism actually from way back, but concerned about autism. And I kept seeing the rates going up year by year. And the message they were just diagnosing it more as if that just dismisses the problem. We don't have to worry about it. I never knew anybody who had any symptoms of autism when I was a child. Nobody. And now most people know somebody who has autism, I think, today, because it's so pervasive. And it can be devastating. Many of the kids can't talk. I think a third or something of the autistic kids are unable to speak. It's not like it's a mild condition. It can be very severely debilitating. And most of the autistic adults are not going to be able to support themselves. They may have some kind of job that's just a way to keep them busy, but they aren't really. Many of them are not capable of holding down a responsible job. It's really quite concerning. And as the rates go up, these kids grow up and they don't grow out of it. So we're going to have a huge burden of adult autism. The onslaught is right now because that first wave is now becoming adult. And we even don't have preparation for them in society. I think we're going to have a lot of trouble knowing how to deal with all these autistic adults. And it just really breaks my heart. And I feel so passionately for the mothers who have done, and I've met so many of these mothers who are awesome. They have taken upon themselves the task of figuring out what's causing their child's autism and how can they fix it. And they have come up with some great solutions that have actually helped. And in some cases, completely reversed it. So that is the first time that I met 16-year-old girl who seemed perfectly normal. She talked to me. She was at an autism conference where I was presenting, and she was there with her mother. And she said, yeah, I was diagnosed with autism when I was young. And then she looked at her mom and said, my mom fixed it. And it just brought chills up my spine. I was so happy. So it's possible to reverse it, which is great news, because I think what's happening is the brain is protecting itself from damage by turning off. I think that's what's going on with autism. It's not allowing the brain to work properly because it knows the system, the organism at some organismic level is aware that with these toxic exposures, if you let the brain do its job, you're going to kill it. You're going to destroy the neurons. They have to be very quiet because otherwise they'll die. I think it's a bit of almost a hibernation.
Wow.
Which is good news because it's protecting the brain. And I don't know how long you could have autism, I think there was actually, I've heard of an adult, I haven't met them, an adult to reverse their autism as an adult. So it's pretty exciting, I think. To give people that hope that the autism could be reversed is very exciting to me. And so people are figuring out, and especially the mothers are figuring out what to do to help their kids. And in fact, there was one mother and she was a scientist, and she figured out glutamate toxicity. I don't know if you were aware of this. So she had an autistic child, a daughter, and she was trying this and that and everything else. And things were getting better, but her daughter still had autism. And it wasn't until she figured out that she had to avoid its MSG, monosodium glutamate. She had to make sure her daughter didn't have any monosodium glutamate in her food. And of course, that's a very popular additive to foods to give flavor, and especially processed foods. So they put a lot of monosodium glutamate in processed foods. And she had to buy all certified organic and all non-processed, and that reversed her child's autism. So this is really exciting to know. And I know glutamate plays an important role in autism, and it's also connected to glyphosate. There have been papers that have shown that glyphosate causes glutamate excitotoxicity in the brain. And it messes up metabolism in such a way as to cause the brain to use glutamate as a fuel instead of glucose, to switch over to glutamate. And then the glutamate is excitotoxic and it kills the neuron. So it's a metabolic disorder with the mitochondria that switches things to this mode in which there's glutamate all around the neuron causing this neuroexcitotoxicity, because glutamate is a neurotransmitter. Right. But the brain can actually use it as a fuel if it needs to, because the normal system that goes with glucose is not working properly. And that's because of glyphosate. So quite interesting. There are other things too, of course, but glyphosate's one of them.
Absolutely fascinating, especially when you consider that glutamate is naturally occurring in some foods that we would consider healthy today, like bone broth.
Right, I know. And glutamate would not be a problem if it weren't for the toxic chemicals. Glutamate's a perfectly fine molecule. It's just that when you have these toxic exposures, your metabolism, you just have to mess up one enzyme and it's devastating. It's really interesting how biology is so fragile. I'm amazed that there are so many people walking around who are pretty much healthy. When I know all these different enzymes that can be affected, one thing is just cobalamin, for example, cobalamin deficiency. A lot of people on a vegan diet, and it's very difficult to get enough cobalamin if you're vegan. And B12, that's B12. And cobalamin is very tricky. It's a fascinating molecule, and it's very hard to get it past the digestive system and get it absorbed through the midgut. In the small intestine is where it gets absorbed. It goes through the acidity of the stomach, and it has ways to be protected from being broken down by the acid. And it has cobalt as a dependency. It's the only vitamin that works with cobalt cobalt is in the center of the molecule. It's a really interesting molecule. And cobalt is severely suppressed by glyphosate because glyphosate binds to these minerals, and cobalt is one of the minerals that it binds to very well. So that you have a cobalt deficiency, and then you have a cobalamin deficiency, and then you have a lot of problems, and that includes glutamate excitotoxicity. It messes up the way the mitochondria work to digest sugars and forces the mitochondria to switch over to glutamate as a substitute for glucose, which is the sugar, in order to be able to push through the rest of the citric acid cycle. So it's quite fascinating, but it's scary. And so cobalamin can be low on B12 in your food. Then you have this cobalt problem. And then on top of that, the cobalamin depends upon a molecule. There's a pyrrole, it's called a pyrrole ring. It's the same as heme. The cobalamin has a structure that comes from something that's similar to heme. And glyphosate disrupts the first step in the synthesis of this critical unit that goes into the cobalamin molecule. So you've got cobalamin getting hit hard by combination of glyphosate exposure in a vegan diet. And in fact, cobalamin deficiency can cause symptoms of dementia. And that's like autism too. Autism is childhood dementia, in my opinion, a bit like dementia, some parallels there. And you can have symptoms of dementia just because of a B12 deficiency. And that's correctable through in fact, you might have to do B12 shots because you can take tons of B12 and it won't go in if your midgut's not able to absorb it. And that's one of the other things that glyphosate messes up. So you're kind of getting hit on it multiple ways just with the cobalamin from the glyphosate. And that's just one thing. There's so many other things that glyphosate disrupts as well, as I've talked about in my book. I talk a lot about sulfate, and that's another one that the autistic kids clearly have a sulfate problem. And that was identified by Rosemary Waring many years ago, 1990s. She was really into autism back when it was pretty rare. She had 100 or more than 100 patients she was working with, and she was doing tests and stuff. She's a brilliant woman, and she figured out. I ran into her work before I discovered glyphosate. And so I was aware that sulfate was a problem with autism, according to her, and I believed it. And then once I found glyphosate, because glyphosate was a miracle story for me, because I was at a conference and Professor Don Huber was speaking at the conference on glyphosate. And I looked at it, the title glyphosate, and I'm like, geez, I don't know what this is, but it's supposed to be toxic. I better listen to this. Maybe it's my answer, because I'm looking for what's causing autism. And I understood that autistic kids have gut problems. It was very clear it was linked to the gut problems and something maybe in their diet. So I was thinking in terms of something in the food, but not knowing what it was. And of course, I didn't think of Roundup at all. I wasn't even aware at that point that Roundup was being so extensively used in agriculture. And so I attended this 2-hour presentation, and that was just completely changed my life. It was an epiphany for me. And I just walked away and ran to the computer to try to find articles on glyphosate. I just wanted to understand this chemical so bad because I really felt I had found my answer in those 2 hours. And I was right. I really believe it. I think it's not the only thing that causes autism, but it's the primary cause of the epidemic. I believe that in my soul. I really believe that. And that's why the good news is you can switch your family to a certified organic and get rid of a lot of the glyphosate exposure that you're experiencing. So anybody who has an autistic child, for sure, make sure they eat certified organic and also eat non-processed foods so they can avoid the glutamate. And you can see MSG in foods that's labeled different things. It can be disguised as protein concentrate or something. There's other words for
flavors.
it. Yeah. So you can easily, the only way to get rid of it is to have MSG. And so glutamate built into proteins is probably a lot better it has to go through the processing of breaking it apart from the protein. The system knows better how to handle it versus free glutamate, which is what's in that MSG.
So this is really interesting because I think that awareness about glyphosate is growing rapidly, thanks in large part to your work. And still, what people are most aware of, if they know about glyphosate at all, is that, oh, okay, that might cause leaky gut, or it disrupts the gut barrier. And what we've just highlighted in just a couple short moments is that this is really a domino effect. So what other health conditions?
I only mentioned autism.
I know, right? So what other health conditions?
I got caught up on the autism, which of course was my passion. And I'm so really happy to have figured it out. I just wish I could shout it to the rooftops so everybody else could know too. But
we'll help you do that. We'll keep spreading your word.
Yeah. So obesity, for example, obesity has been going up in this country exactly in step with the rise in glyphosate usage on crops. A very good match. And I understand why, because of the disruption of metabolism. It actually, I think it disrupts the ability to get the fats out of the fat cells. And it probably also encourages certain metabolisms. People have different kinds of metabolism. Some people stay thin no matter what. But the ones who have a predisposition to get fat, their body is trying to store those fats in part because it's aware that, and I think of this as an awareness of a sort of living organism, but there's all this communication that goes on in the body among the cells, and they change it policy based on what different parts are experiencing, and they can decide. So there's a sense of the metabolism is busted. And eventually we might not even be able to eat. So we need to store a bunch of fat so we'll have something to eat when we can't eat anymore, because people get to the point where they can't eat. Their gut is so sick that they can't eat. And that's often terminal cancer, for example, something like that. And then they can live off of their fat and live longer because they have that resource. People with cancer who are skinny don't have that resource. And so they don't have a chance to live as long on the nutrients that have been stored in their body. So that's interesting. So obesity, definitely. Diabetes is another one. Even type 1 diabetes, both type 1 and type 2 diabetes, both going up dramatically. Alzheimer's, various cancers, thyroid cancer, pancreatic cancer, kidney cancer, liver cancer, and then liver and kidney disease. Fatty liver disease is a big one. Fatty liver disease is very clear because I like to talk about two studies, and that's covered in my book. One is on the mice, or it might have been rats. I think it was rats. They were exposed to low-dose glyphosate, and then they were monitored for indicators of fatty liver disease. And they showed that the rats got fatty liver disease with very low, below regulatory limits. Exposure to glyphosate gave them fatty liver disease. And the other experiment was on people, and they had three groups: those who had no liver disease, those who had mild cases, and those who had severe cases. They divided them into three groups, and they found statistically significant differences in the level of glyphosate in the urine among the three groups. I thought that was really amazing, because the level in the urine is really a short-term measure of maybe the last couple of weeks of exposure. But even despite that sort of limitation, they were able to show that those people who had severe disease were getting exposed, at least in the past 2 weeks, to more glyphosate than the ones who didn't have it. And I think that's quite a dramatic clue. And of course, I can also explain how it would cause fatty liver disease. And I have a whole chapter on the liver in my book where you could find out the reason why it causes it. It's quite interesting.
Yeah, it's so important because we're looking at those numbers just skyrocket. What, 1 in 4 Americans now has Children have fatty liver disease. It's just really frightening. And then, of course, there's also the leaky gut you mentioned. That's been shown experimentally in published papers: leaky gut, and inflammatory gut, and irritable bowel syndrome, and also, of course, celiac disease. Celiac disease is interesting because that one, I wrote a paper together with Anthony Samsel some time ago, and celiac disease is going up over time, in step with the rise in glyphosate usage on wheat, which totally makes sense. The usage on wheat is very different, the pattern, from the usage on corn and soy. But the pattern matches wheat, but not corn and soy for the celiac disease. I think it's extremely clear. And of course, correlation doesn't necessarily mean causation, but you can understand why it would cause celiac disease. And that's also quite interesting science. And I write about it in my book. And it really has to do with gluten. So the gluten and casein are both challenging proteins to digest because they're rich in proline, and proline is an amino acid that's tricky to separate from its partners. So you have these amino acids all lined up in the protein. It's fascinating, the biology of it. And so to digest the protein, you have to snip them apart into individual amino acids. And there are enzymes that do that quite well, but proline is a special case. And the human cells don't have very good capabilities of breaking apart proline. They rely on their gut microbes to do that for them. And the lactobacillus, which of course is the main
microbe in the infant gut. That's what drinks the milk, if you will. Lactobacillus can handle that casein very well. Casein has a lot of proline. That's the milk protein that a lot of people are also sensitive to. And the lactobacillus can snip off those prolines, no problem, to release them as individual. And then they can get absorbed, and proline can be used to make more proteins. Because basically we eat protein, the amino acids are all stuck together. We have to snip them apart and absorb them in the upper intestine. And then our cells can use them to make new proteins. That's how the whole system works, And so people are taking all kinds of amino acid supplements. You can get aminos, right? A big jug of aminos. I've seen them even at Whole Foods or something. And people are taking amino acids as supplements. And I think it's a huge business right now. Now, I never knew about it when I was a kid. There's no such thing as aminos as a supplement, but people need them because they can't break apart the protein. So what happens is you're eating protein, and it's not getting digested because the lactobacillus are very sensitive to glyphosate. And that's an issue with autism as well, because it's so important in the infant gut. If the infant is exposed to glyphosate from whatever it's drinking, either soy or even from the mother's milk, because Zen Honeycutt has found glyphosate was detectable in the breast milk from various. Zen Honeycutt is Moms Across America. She's a friend of mine. She's awesome. She started Moms Across America, which has had glyphosate as a major message for their program, an advocacy group. And they tested these on the breast milk and found a third of the people, and these were people who were being conscientious about eating well. And nevertheless, a third of them tested positive for glyphosate in the breast milk. And of course, soy formula is going to have glyphosate if it's not organic. And it's very expensive to get organic soy formula. So the infant's exposed to glyphosate early on, and the glyphosate messes up those lactobacillus. And then the milk can't be digested, and they get this problem with casein. And of course, gluten, same thing. So when they start eating wheat, the gluten's not getting digested. Those proteins, those peptides are coming through intact. It's these snippets of several amino acids stuck together, with proline being the blockage. And those things are very allergenic. They cause autoimmune problems because whenever the immune cells are very aware, the immune system is amazing, and it gets trained to recognize self versus other. And so when it sees a peptide that's familiar to it, because it's something the human body makes, that's fine, no problem. But if it sees a peptide sequence that it doesn't recognize as something that should be there, it's going to get upset. And so the immune system starts to build antibodies to the gluten. And then those antibodies start attacking the tissues through something called molecular mimicry. The human protein looks similar to, but not exactly the same as that gluten, and the antibody is nearsighted, so it doesn't quite see that this is not the right protein to attack, and it ends up attacking your tissues, and then you get the issues of the symptoms of gluten intolerance.
That's such a beautiful way to describe what's going on there. So many people talk around that issue, but that's the best description I've ever heard of what's really going on today.
Thank you.
Thank you. One of the things that I wanted to briefly touch on, so for the audience listening in, we're going to transition to a very important topic in a few moments, but I want to give you, Dr. Seneff, a few moments to speak more on just a couple mechanisms of damage with glyphosate that I think are appreciated. So we have...
You might be referring to glycine. Its role as a glycine analog, because I do want to say that. And that's a central theme of my book. I really believe that this is what's happening. That's what makes it such a demonic chemical, because it's insidiously, cumulatively toxic. It builds up in your body, gets into your proteins, messes them up. And certain proteins have critical dependencies on glycine. Glycine is the smallest amino acid. And the amino acids are the building blocks of proteins. And glyphosate is a glycine molecule. It's a complete glycine molecule, except that it's replaced a hydrogen that was originally attached to the nitrogen. It's taken that hydrogen off and replaced it with something called a methylphosphonate. So it's got this big bulky thing sticking onto its nitrogen atom. And that makes its biophysical and biochemical properties very different from glycine, because it's negatively charged, it's bulky. The enzyme has been beautifully designed. Often they choose glycine at that spot because it needs to be small. Mm-hmm. And you'll find enzymes that have extremely conserved glycines, which means that you can get all kinds of mutations, but you never get a mutation in that glycine. Probably because if that happens, you don't live. The fetus dies. It's that bad. There can be enzymes where if you replace that glycine in the genome, in the genomic code, you can't survive. It wrecks that enzyme so badly you can't survive. That's quite amazing to me that you can have that. That's true for enzymes, that a single amino acid change can be deadly. And so you can find in literature, and I did that looking for genetic mutations, where there's a glycine substitution and there's a devastating disease, or that the fetus doesn't survive, then you know that glycine is extremely important for that protein. But then the other thing I figured out was this glyphosate susceptibility motif. Now, glycine is actually, so there's a DNA code, and you have a 3-letter code that codes for a specific amino acid. And there's a code for glycine. And so when glyphosate's lying around and the protein's being built and it sees the code for glycine, it grabs glyphosate by mistake and sticks it into the protein. That's what I think is happening. And there's a lot of evidence. I have a couple of chapters where I focus on the evidence that supports this idea. And all these diseases that are going up dramatically in step with glyphosate can be explained if you assume this is what's happening. Otherwise, they're very hard to explain. To have that many diseases being caused by one chemical is really hard to explain unless there's something very demonic and unique about that chemical. And glyphosate is the only chemical I know of that does this, that can do this.
And we're also saying it's stored deep in the tissues, right? So like the
right,
rise
it goes
of non-contact
everywhere.
injuries, it could be attributed in part to glyphosate being used in place of glycine.
Absolutely. In fact, I have a paper that I wrote together with some colleagues on the brain being very vulnerable to injury. Like in football, the football players are getting these horrible dementia as they grow older because of having impact too many times, getting their head hit hard and getting jarred and damaging the neurons. And what's interesting is that in the brain, all over the body, sulfate, and I talk a lot about sulfate in my book, I haven't said much here, but sulfate is really important in the glycocalyx for maintaining gelled water. So most of the body contains gelled water, like Jello, right? The sulfate allows it to become like Jello. It's structured water. This Gerald Pollack has done a wonderful job writing on books for the public on that topic. It's really interesting. And I could go on and on about that, but let's just say that the brain normally is gelled. The neurons have a lot of support from the gel, but when there's not enough sulfate, the water gets liquid. It becomes less gelled, and the neurons are not held so securely. And so if you could imagine something in water versus in Jello, sitting inside Jello versus sitting inside water and getting impacted, you could see that the impact would be much stronger because the water can't support it and hold it in place. And the neurons are just flying around and getting injured by the impact as a consequence of not being properly held in the gel. And the sulfate deficiency in the brain is a very clear indicator of autism. Quite interesting in mouse studies. There was a mouse study where they were able to mess up the ability to make heparan sulfate, specifically in the brain ventricles, for these mice. That's the only injury they had. They were normal mice, but then they messed with them at birth to mess up their ability to make heparan sulfate in the brain ventricles. And those mice exhibited all the mouse symptoms of autism. And then they have another mouse model that breeds true for autism. And those mice also have deficiency. They've found that they have a deficient level of heparan sulfate in the brain. And the heparan sulfate has been shown to be important for neuron development in the embryo. The development of the neurons depends upon heparan sulfate. So the neurons don't develop properly if there's not enough heparan sulfate in the brain. And then postmortem studies on human autistic people have found also heparan sulfate reduction in the brain. So I think that's a central feature of autism. And that's going to make the autistic kids also vulnerable to head injuries.
Absolutely. What a beautiful way to summarize a really complex issue. I'm so grateful for your work in this area. I cannot even express it to you. And this is such an important component for us to take responsibility for what has happened. And there's so much that we can do to detox from glyphosate. This is complex, but it's not mysterious. So thank you so much for this body of research.
Thank you.
I really want to transition to your latest work. And so what we're going to do, folks who are listening in live, we're going to go off live channels. And this part is going to be available only to our communities, our email list, and our podcast. So we're going to stop the live stream because we can't, it's too precious and important to get censored. So here we go. All right.
That's great.
Haha. We win. Okay.
Clever.
So, could you please explain to the audience your recent body of work and why it is so important and impacting the world right now?
Yes, I honestly thought that I would never encounter something that I thought was more worrisome than glyphosate. And now I feel like I have. And this is the messenger RNA vaccines. I am absolutely distraught by what's happening with the messenger RNA vaccines. And I cannot believe that the government is letting this happen. It is so shocking to me. And so as soon as I was aware of warp speed, I started studying the messenger RNA technology. I started looking through the literature, reading the whole development process, the snags that they came upon and how they fixed them, how they were developing. I think they were poised to think that they might be able to release the technology, that it might be ready, because they found some critical tricks that they could play to allow the messenger RNA to survive. So they've actually manipulated. So in messenger RNA vaccines, they have the RNA that codes for the spike protein. And the spike protein is the most toxic element in the virus, in the SARS-CoV-2 virus. But the problem was they were trying to develop vaccines that the concept was you could just give the cells the RNA and let the cells themselves make the poison from the instructions of the RNA that's packaged inside the lipid particle that looks like an LDL particle. So it's a demonic idea, in my opinion, to get the human cells to produce a toxin in order to get the human cells to produce an antibody to that toxin. In a way, it's logical. We need to have antibodies that spike protein, so let's just do it this way. But it's not reasonable to assume that's not going to be toxic to the person, to be able to get their cells to make a toxin like that's that bad uncontrollably, not to be able to turn it off. And that's what they've done. They've rigged this RNA. And it's very different from the RNA that the virus produces. And it's different in ways that cause it to be extremely sturdy and extremely efficient at making protein and not being able to be shut down. So any cell that takes it up is stuck making lots of spike protein. And the RNA is incredibly durable. And normally, a messenger RNA molecule is made, it makes some proteins, and in a few hours, it's gone. It's broken down. That's a normal messenger RNA molecule. This one lasts for months, and it's been shown experimentally. It's still around 2 months later. And it might even be indefinite if it gets turned into DNA, which is also a very distinct possibility. And I've actually published a paper recently with colleagues on the topic of the potential for the messenger RNA to become DNA and even potentially to become permanently installed in the body, such that if you're a person who's unlucky enough to have this happen to you, your body will be able to make spike protein for the rest of your life. You will not be able to stop because of having this DNA integrated into the human genome, DNA that codes for the spike protein integrated into the human genome. It is a real possibility. And even if it's not integrated, it's also already very bad because sperm cells can make DNA from RNA. That's something that's been known for a long time. We found a paper from, I think, maybe 2010 that showed that sperm take up foreign messenger RNA, convert it to DNA, package it up inside little plasmids. These are little lipid particles, and release it. And so at the time of fertilization of the egg, all the sperm are releasing these lipid particles containing potentially foreign messenger RNA. And then the fertilized egg takes them up, and it can become a permanent part. Those plasmids can survive basically forever in that fetus, and that fetus can pass it on to its kids. So that's really terrifying to think about that possibility. Children being born able to make the spike protein from these plasmids that were picked up from the sperm. I think that's a real possibility. Cancer cells also, and it's been shown, they express something called line 1, LINE-1, that provides the capability. It's called reverse transcriptase. It's able to convert RNA into DNA. The normal message and the whole concept of biology was that DNA goes to RNA, goes to protein. That's the basic principle of biology. But what people are becoming more and more aware of is that RNA can go back to DNA, and it happens under conditions of stress. And so there's already a paper published that showed that liver cancer cells grown in culture, when you basically give them the messenger RNA vaccine, they produce DNA from it within 6 hours. They've got
Whoa.
DNA. So it's pretty scary, I think. And I think that people who are getting severely injured, we're seeing incredible injuries from these vaccines. And I personally people have reached out to me from all over. I've had at least 50 emails from people, either themselves or a friend or a family member, devastating consequences of the messenger RNA vaccine, including ALS and CJD, Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, which is the human mad cow disease, Parkinson's disease. All of these things are showing up in rare cases. That's rare, but still the implication to me is that everybody has the potential to have accelerated rate of deterioration towards neurodegenerative disease over time.
Issues. Yeah.
There's circulatory issues, all these fibroids, there's these fibrin things that are showing up in the blood. That's also connected to the prion-like characteristic of the spike protein. The spike protein is a prion-like protein, and prion disease, that's mad cow. That's the CJD, Creutzfeldt-Jakob, very debilitating disease, always fatal. And that's a disease that progresses very slowly over time. It starts off with the spleen, usually. The gut, you can get a prion because you can eat. People became aware with mad cow that you could eat contaminated meat and you could end up with a human mad cow. It's the CJD. Mm-hmm. But the spike protein has prion-like characteristics, and that's why it's called amyloidogenesis. There's all these interesting proteins in the body that are very important in their function, but they can misfold in a way that causes these debilitating diseases, and including, of course, all those blood clots. The blood clots are an example of the prion protein, the spike protein disrupting the folding of the things that are released by the platelets to cause blood clots. And those blood clots become very tough because of the influence of the spike protein, and they become unable to undo. So there's a constant process in the body of maintaining healthy blood vessels to block places where it might leak and put in a blood clot and then eventually dissolve the blood clot. The dissolving is not happening because these things are too sturdy, and they're too sturdy because the spike protein is messing up the way they're folding. And that's the same thing that's happening in the plaque in the brain, like Alzheimer's disease. It's the same thing. The spike protein gets into the brain. Studies on mice have shown they just expose the mice to S1, which is a piece of the spike protein. It's a toxic piece. It has the ACE2 binding. It has a receptor site, the ACE2 receptor site. And S1 is very toxic all by itself. And S1 can get broken off from the spike protein at the furin cleavage site. So it's got this special segment in it called the furin cleavage site. That is a unique form of the spike protein in the SARS-CoV-2 that allows it to be cut up into S1 and S2, and S1 can just break loose and circulate. So the immune cells in the spleen are busy making spike protein because they've picked up the vaccine, and then they're displaying that spike protein on their surface, but they're also releasing it inside exosomes. These are little lipid particles that are the communication network of the body, and those exosomes travel very well along nerve fibers. And so they're traveling along the vagus nerve up to the brain, up to the heart, over to the liver. And all of those organs are becoming inflamed and then getting sick. And you have this myocarditis, which is a nightmare, especially among the young male athletes, myocarditis. And that's being caused by the inflammation that's induced by the spike protein. I think that's being delivered in the form of these little exosomes being spit out by those immune cells in the spleen that are furiously making spike protein and can't stop themselves. It's really scary. And once you've got the myocarditis, I found a paper from some time ago, I think 2005. It was a fascinating paper where they had exposed mice to a virus that causes myocarditis. And then 120 days later, they gave them a shot of adrenaline. And 70% of them died within 10 minutes from that shot of adrenaline. Whereas they had control mice that didn't have myocarditis. They got the same shot. None of them died. And in fact, they didn't even have any obvious injuries, whereas the other ones had lots of injuries evident in the heart from the adrenaline rush. And so you have a person in an exciting game playing sports who's had a recent vaccine. I think very scary, very scary.
This is really, it has moved so quickly into mainstream exposure. This is such a hard topic for people to even consider and face. So for one thing, I just want to share my gratitude that you're willing to look at this difficult topic. And I really want to help people listening understand potentially the long-reaching implications. So you've already mentioned how the effect can be generational. What else might we expect? For example, when a question that we get all the time is, I have not had the shot. What can I expect?
Can I get it anyway?
Damage. Yeah, because of about the spike proteins and all that.
That's really
what are your
scary.
Thoughts on that?
If you haven't had the shot, but you hang out with people who have.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
And I wrote about that actually. Greg and I published a paper early on. We started working on that paper really right after the vaccine was released, and it was published in May of that year. I guess that was 2021. Is it? Yeah, 2021. Yeah. I'm losing track of the years. And we actually talked about the potential for you to pick up the spike protein from the vaccine, even the code for the spike protein, but also the spike protein in the exosomes that are being produced by the vaccinated person. And so those exosomes can go anywhere. I said they travel along nerve fibers because they can also get released into the blood. They can go over to the lungs. You can breathe them out. They can probably get extruded in your skin. We don't know, right? The experiments haven't been done, but exosomes are well known as something that you can cough out. If you have a cold, you're coughing, exosomes are being released into the air, and then somebody else can just breathe them in. So definitely there's the potential. And I've heard anecdotally about people, like a woman hanging out with her friends on a overnight at a camping and the friends are all vaccinated and she's not, and then her period shows up the next day. It's definitely messing up the reproductive system. And this has me very nervous. I have friends who are passionate. There's an obstetrician who's very passionate about the dangers to reproduction. And this is what's so terrifying about giving it to the kids, even before they're sexually mature. I can't imagine what that's going to do to their ovaries and their testes, because it goes into those organs. That's been shown. Tracer studies have shown that it shows up among the organs. It shows up primarily highest concentrations in the spleen. But then right next in line for the females was the ovaries. In a study in Japan, the ovaries were right up there close to where the spleen, level in the spleen. Ovaries, the spleen, the liver, those are the dominant, and the adrenal glands probably too. Those are places where it ends up because it's traveling through the lymph system and it can get to them very easily that way. And the ovaries will get inflamed and they'll get damaged. And if you're pregnant, the placenta is obviously the place where it's going to show up. And in fact, there's a new paper out that I haven't had a chance to read, but it sounds really ominous, that it's looking at cord blood from vaccinated women. These people actually were involved in the technology of collecting cord blood because it can be very important to help people out. I think when they have an organ transplant, maybe, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Cord blood has these wonderful immune cells that are immune stem cells that are really terrific for helping to be able to turn into anything. They have a lot of flexibility about what they can become, and they become very important to help out someone who needs something like that. And they found, I think there was a 4-fold reduction in the number of stem cells that were present, of these unique special stem cells that were I forget what they were called. I'd have to go back and check, but they were a specific kind of stem cell that was 4-fold reduced in level in the cord blood from these vaccinated women. So that's really quite terrifying to me. That means, of course, also for the baby, right? Because the cord blood is what's supplying, is working with the communication between the mother and the baby and the blood supply. Not having that defective version of the cord blood is bound to impact the fetus as well. So that's really frightening. And of course, we've got high rates of spontaneous abortion. I think 98% of the spontaneous abortions in the VAERS database, Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, that were reported for any vaccine in 2021, 98% of them were reported for the COVID vaccine. So 2% for all the other vaccines put together. And so that
is a really frightening statistic.
Yeah, and it also affects the sperm as well. I think the sperm counts were down. There was a study on sperm. So studies are coming out. These studies should be front page news, but of course the mainstream says, oh no, this is just false, fake science. It's just fake science. How much do you have to do before they finally admit it's not fake? What do you have to do? And of course, now we've got the CDC deciding that it's perfectly fine to put it on the schedule for the kids. You heard about that?
Yeah, I did. Even as the FDA stopped recommending it for children. Hello, are we having this conversation right now?
Oh, did the FDA stop recommending it for children?
Very quietly a couple of months ago.
That's very exciting. I know that other countries are saying nobody under 18 can have this vaccine. Other countries, but the U.S. seems to be gung-ho about getting it. And of course, they want to get it on the schedule so that they can protect the industry from the lawsuits. The industry knows that they cannot manufacture this vaccine if they are liable for lawsuits. They're going to be in such trouble. And so there's a tremendous desire on their part to make sure the government allows it to go on the schedule for the kids, because then we're scot-free for everybody. That's such a crazy rule. That's the thing we need to do more than anything else. We need to get rid of that.
Repeal that 1986.
Absolutely. We need to get rid of it. That would be so awesome, because that would really change so much about the vaccine situation, I think.
We know it's not going to come from the top down. We need to keep having these smaller conversations because we can't stop the spread of this information. We have to protect humanity and the soul of who we can be. I would certainly urge any mother out there to do everything they can to avoid letting their child get this vaccine. Absolutely everything they can. And it really begs the question, like, how can we protect our future generations? I know. Absolutely. Don't get it yourself. Reproduce if you haven't gotten it. Protect yourself during pregnancy, all of it. I know. Absolutely. I know if I go to a conference and have visible menstrual issues and a bleeding nose, and I'm taking all sorts of precautions and things, but if I'm in a room with a couple hundred people who've been vaccinated, I will have visible signs of distress in my body within 24 hours. That's amazing. Yeah, I think it must be real. I remember when we were writing that paper, we were hearing, and actually my co-author had patients who were reporting to him. I think he had 3 women that he was
personally knew who had experienced this problem, not vaccinated yet, having these menstrual problems that they'd never had before. And that's when we decided we got to figure out how this is happening. And that's how we came up with this idea of the exosomes, which may not be the right answer, but I think it is. I feel like it makes the most sense because the immune cells are going to turn that spike protein into exosomes as quickly as they can because they need to get rid of it. They know it's poisonous and they got to get rid of it, and they just dump it out. And they say, somebody else take care of this. I can't do it. It's too much. Let the rest of the cells see what they can do with it. And it's basically spreading the poison all over the body. And that's just really frightening. So it's so clear that this vaccine is far more toxic than any other vaccine. There's 27 times as many reports in VAERS for the COVID vaccines as for the flu shot, if you normalize by the number of shots that were delivered. 27. Mm-hmm. So there's a 27-fold increased risk of having an adverse reaction to these COVID vaccines. And sometimes it can kill you. I know of cases where they start developing symptoms shortly after the second vaccine, and a year later they're dead, or 3 months later they're dead with a severe case of Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. I know of cases like that. And I also know of cases of ALS. I get people that send me email, 5 people, ALS-like symptoms.
For a while there, we were getting reports pretty much once a week of someone who was dying with vaccine complications.
Really scary. It's just outrageous for the children because there's absolutely no way, when you look at the risk-benefit ratio for kids, 2 in a million kids are dying from COVID if they catch it. If you catch COVID as a child, you have a chance of 2 in a million of dying from it. That is so small. And whereas the vaccine, I'm sure it's much higher than that. And of course, also lifetime debility, unable to reproduce, things like that. There's no way that it makes sense for a child to get this vaccine.
Thank you for saying that. We're really, by having this conversation at all, it is absolutely an act of bravery and courage. And if you're listening to this, I'm inviting you to have a similar conversation with your loved ones and to open the topic and to do it with love and care and grace, because this has been a real snow job. And it's very difficult to fight a narrative that's coming from the top down. But if we care about each other, we have to have this conversation.
Thank you. I agree with that.
And I know that people are listening and we so value your insight and your brilliant mind. I'm going to get the question in the letters. What can I do if I've already had the vaccine? Is there anything I can take? What can I do if I haven't had the vaccine? Is there anything I can do to protect myself? What are your thoughts on that right now?
Yeah, I'm not a practitioner, so I personally don't know, but I do have friends who are working on that problem. I have very much great admiration of my alternative medicine friends who are determined to find a way to help these people. They're just that kind of person, and they're finding ways that potentially can help. And it really is the same as long haul COVID. I think a lot of times people do recover from COVID, but not really. They end up with debilitating, continuing symptoms that go on forever. And that's probably the same thing that's happening with the vaccine. So you can get essentially long haul COVID. Things like glutathione, vitamin C, there's some natural nutrients that can help. I think also Ayurvedic medicine. And in fact, I want to share, my husband is Chinese, and he learned from some Chinese friends in Taiwan about a medicine, an herbal medicine that Taiwanese had developed specifically for COVID-19. And it has 12 different ingredients that are ancient Chinese medicine ingredients that are specially chosen for the COVID-19 situation. And he's been taking that prophylactically off and on continuously. And then he finally got COVID a couple months ago. And he had he's got, you would expect him to be in the category of people who would be very sensitive to, and he has no vaccine. So you would think, oh my God. And he had hardly any symptoms. He just had a cough, really not even a bad cold, just a cold. And he tested positive. We're really happy that he's gotten the COVID, he's got the antibodies. And then, of course, he took this medicine every day. And I got COVID at the same time, and I took the medicine every day too. My case was a little worse than his, but only the first day. I was very uncomfortable the first day, but after that, it was fine. And I just took this medicine. So it's possible. And then there's an Ayurvedic medicine from India I'm familiar with. I have a friend who's in the process of developing and marketing this similar medicine, because I sent him information about Victor's medicine, my husband's medicine. And he said, oh yeah, a lot of the same stuff. So there's a lot of overlap between the ancient Indian medicine and the ancient Chinese medicine. So I think that's actually a really good option, because these are all natural. These are natural products, not synthetics. I think people who are aware of ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine as a way to treat COVID early treatment for COVID. Of course, that's a big controversy as well. But those people are also thinking, I think some of them, that you could take those after you've got the vaccine, to take those to help you to deal with the symptoms of the vaccine. I don't know, but it's what they're recommending. And there's some other interesting things like methylene blue. There's some interesting things being circulated among my friends. I can't say because I'm not a practitioner, but you can find people who are trying and who have ideas, and those ideas could work.
I think the important thing is to remember that there's a lot of us looking at this issue and experimenting on the forefront with people in our clinics. What can be done? What is making a difference? And so it's way too early to give up hope. We need to get a lot of eyeballs on this issue and start having a serious, real conversation about what's actually going on.
I agree.
Thank you so much for dedicating your brilliance to this topic. I find it to be very inspiring because you're one of the great minds alive on the planet today. And if you're willing to look at this, I just really appreciate you for your courage and your insight you're willing to give to the topic.
Yeah, it's so important that I can't let it go.
Yeah.
It's really our future. The future of humanity, I think, is at stake.
I do too. Are there any last thoughts that you'd like to share with our audience? We've covered a vast range of topics.
I know. I always have to say sunlight. Get out in the sun without sunscreen, without sunglasses even. The sun is very healing. Plants, obviously, chlorophyll, they can't survive without the sunlight. Animals would be foolish to ignore the sun as a resource for energy. And so I think our bodies have figured out how to use sunlight very effectively for healing. And so I recommend that for everybody, for everything. So I'm a big fan of the sun.
Thank you so much for your help and for giving us your precious time today. We so appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. Go to detoxrejuvenation.com to find links in the show notes to everything we covered in this episode. Please subscribe, review, and share with other humans who need this precious information. Let's help each other. Until next time, love, Sinclair.